Before man invaded, the vast stretch of land on the southern coast of Africa was once a lush green forest, now called the Knysna forest. This mystical, magical forest was once home to the great herds of Knysna elephants who existed peacefully in this green sanctuary for decades and centuries. Everything changed in 1763 when the land was invaded by the settlers, the hunters, and the woodcutters and the farmers. The trees were felled and the elephants hunted to extinction. The discovery of gold at the Mulwood Creek in the forest in 1860 led to a shanty town abandoned after 20 years. But one dwelling has been renovated into an overnight lodging for the people going on the trial in the forest. And this was a backdrop to a spree killing in the forest in 1991. The Knysna forest is now protected by foresters, and it has grown dense and impenetrable as ever. But only one elusive elephant, she still remains. During the late 18th and the 19th centuries, the town of Knysna, with its port protected by a lake and the impressive Knysna heads, thrived due to the timber and the ivory. Today, the town of Knysna still retains much of its Victorian charm. George Rick, the founder of the town, also donated money for them to build the St. George's Anglican Church. And it was in the grounds of this church that a murder was committed in 2005 by a serial killer. Returning to the forest, in 1991, an adventurous American, Edward Perlmutter, hitchhiked through Africa, and he let his parents know that he was in Knysna. So when his parents did not hear anything from him for 2 weeks, they contacted the Knysna police. The case of the missing person was then allocated to Warrant Officer Lawrence Oliver, who placed Edward's photograph in the newspaper. Then a Mr. and Mrs. Baxter from Cape Town contacted him, and they told him that they had met Edward in the forest on the trial, and they overnighted at the Millwood cottage in the trial. And Edward told them that he would go ahead and he would meet up with them at the end of the trial. However, when they reached the end of the trial, Edmund wasn't there, and they just thought that he had went on his way. So Oliver organized a search party, and the police dogs were brought in. And then eventually they discovered Edward's body on the 25th of October in 1991. Now, several people then compiled identity kits who had seen two suspicious men, and they also gave him a description of the clothing. And this led him to a clue to the Sand Pebbles bar in Durban, and he decided to go there. But on his way, he went to Port Elizabeth because there was a warrant officer, Whale, who had the case of an attempted murder of Clive Newen, and the cases corresponded, so they decided to work together. Now, Newman's marine Monza was also stolen by his attackers. They'd slit his throat and they left him for dead, but he actually survived. They all went to Durban to the Sandpebbles bar, and there they were informed that their suspect was a 30-year-old man called Antoni Wessels. But he was wanted by the Child Protection Unit because he had the 16-year-old minor with him, Jean-Pierre Hafenga. From Durban, then they got a clue that led them to Johannesburg, and they went to Johannesburg where they teamed up with Captain Piet Bielefeld of the Brixton Murder and Robbery Unit. The vehicle, the Monza, was then spotted at a bar somewhere in Boxwood, and the suspects were then arrested. Now, Oliver and Bielefeld then interrogated Antoni Wessels, who then told them that not only had he killed Edward Perlmutter, he also killed Clive Newman, which he thought was dead, but they also murdered a 15-year-old David Schemmels in the Drakensberg, as well as Jacobus Petrus Joubert, a retired prison warden in Pretoria. Now, David Schemmels was in the same foster care home as Jean-Pierre Hafenga, and both of these boys fled and ran away and joined Antoni Wessels. They killed David Schemmels because he became a liability, and Antoni also told them they went back to the body and cut the flesh because they were hungry. Antoni Wessels was then eventually sentenced to death, and it was later converted to life, and Jean-Pierre Hafenga was sentenced to 25 years. Hafenga has since been released on parole, and he turned religious. Wessels is still incarcerated and has now found many new lovers to replace Hafenga, although when he was sentenced, he told the judge that he would kill an inmate for every day that he was separated from Hafenga. Now, Wessels admitted that they killed the men, or he killed the men that they encountered on the run from the police because these men had come onto Jean-Pierre Hafenga. So both of them were spree killers, not serial killers. Antony had a clear yet unjustifiable motive for killing the men, and Jean-Pierre Hafenga just tagged along. The difference between spree killers and serial killers is a spree killer is defined as one or two persons who kill two or more victims during one event, which could last for a long period of a few days or a few weeks, at two or more locations with no cooling off period. My definition of a serial killer is a person who murders several victims, usually strangers, at different times, not necessarily at the same location, with a cooling off period in between. And the motive is intrinsic, an almost irresistible compulsion, fueled by fantasy, which may lead to torture and or sexual abuse, mutilation, and necrophilia. Spree killers kill impulsively and indiscriminately, and they have fun as they go along. And their murders are usually not very well planned or executed. There is no deep intrinsic motivation and fantasy as there is with the serial killers. There is one too many ghosts at Millwood in the Knysna forest, and the town of Knysna was shocked when 14 years later were the murders of two young women. Early on the morning of the 13th of October in 2005, the body of 18-year-old Jessica Wheeler was discovered in the grounds of the St. George Anglican Church, the one donated by George Rex. While the police were processing the scene, her flatmate identified her on the scene, and several witnesses then made statements that Jessica, the previous evening, had visited several clubs. It was the Stones and the Zanzibar clubs. 3 days later, Jessica's autopsy revealed that she died due to asphyxia and aspiration of soil. The murderer must have pressed her face into the ground. Swabs were taken. Then on the 8th of November in 2005, another young woman, Victoria Studler, went missing after frequenting the two nightclubs. 2 days later, the burnt-out vehicle was discovered in the forest near Nutsi, which is a hamlet just next to Knysna. Unfortunately, the police did not really investigate this. When the police finally paid attention to the missing persons report, they returned to the scene and found this was Jessica's vehicle, Victoria's vehicle, apology. And they also then found Victoria's body. It was determined that her body had been close to the burning car, but was dragged into the bushes. And the cases were then allocated to Inspector Rian Meyer. The autopsy of Victoria revealed that she was strangled and she was dead before the fire. So swabs were also taken. Then, through CCTV camera footage and reading the witnesses' statements, Meyer identified Heine van Rooyen, the local DJ at Stones, as a suspect. Now, Heine then admitted that he knew the women. He even alluded to a secret relationship between him and Jessica, and he informed the police that he had consensual relations with her on the night of her murder. He denied having any consensual or relations with Victoria, and he told them they had drinks in the bar and then she dropped them off close to his house. The clothes collected from his home matched the description of the clothes noted that a victim noted in the churchyard on the morning of Jessica's death. In his trial, Van Rooyen was positively linked to Victoria's murder scene due to pollen matches on his clothes. It was the first time in South Africa that pollen matches actually put a person on the crime scene. His DNA also matched the samples taken from both women. He was found guilty on both murders and the indecent assault of Jessica, and he was sentenced to life. Now, retired FBI profiler Roy Hazelwood taught me there is a difference between a serial killer who kills for an intrinsic motive and a serial rapist who kills not to be identified. So in this case, Heine van Rooyen is a serial rapist who killed his victims to conceal his identity. Please give your thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you like what we're doing. And if you are seriously interested in forensic profiling, then please join our Patreon account by clicking on the QR code. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a very festive holiday season.